to contribute one of the things that really jumped out to them when they were writing about this topic. What do you think of when you hear the term mean girls? Yes.
So we used a very strong word, and the first word was bitch. Like that was the first thing that popped through our head.
Not gonna begrudge you for that word. Nope. Any other words? What else came to mind? Yes.
Popular.
Any others?
Popular.
I'd like to hear from some of the gentlemen in the room, maybe. Oh, great, Brian.
I said fat. This is mean.
Oh, that's very interesting. Okay, so the reason why this topic was relevant to me in my practice this year is because I teach at a brand new public school in Los Angeles that is all girls. It is the first and only all-girls public school in the state of California. We are a SPAN school, which means we will be when we are at full enrollment, we will be middle and high school grades. But currently, because we've only been open for 2 years, we have 6th, 7th, 9th, and 10th. Our school was created to create a pathway for girls into the subjects of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And our core values as a school are leadership, wellness, and excellence. We'll get back to that. Okay. My students, for me, as I mentioned, I am an English language arts teacher. My students are very diverse, uniquely diverse for a Los Angeles urban school, in fact. We are 58% Title I, which is, if you're not sure, that means they qualify for free or reduced lunch. So it's a measure of socioeconomic status. 44% of our middle school students are Title I, and 78% of the high school students. We are racially diverse, 33% Latina, 27% Caucasian, 24% African American, and 10% Asian students. And I teach primarily 7th grade English language arts, but I also teach the leadership elective. And I decided in my process to focus my research on my leadership elective. Now, what came up for me in the first semester of teaching at my school was that the girls were often complaining of mean girl, unsafe, shady social politics. Now, that really concerned me because me and my background, I am 30 years old. When I was in my early 20s, I attended a tiny all-women's liberal arts school in rural Georgia. So coming to UCLA here has been a little bit of a culture shock, but my experience was that in K through 12, I never felt safe, I never felt seen, and I never felt heard. School was just a place I went, and it was a place I had to go. It was not the center of my life. And in fact, in my high school years, it became a net negative rather than a positive, okay? I remember several teachers not even knowing my name. I remember feeling open to harassment from my male counterparts and my female counterparts. So it was just not a positive experience. But when I went off to my undergraduate school, that all changed for me. And it was the first educational environment where I felt safe and I felt a part of. And I felt like I could, for the first time, create genuine and sincere relationships with other females and build those friendships out of a sense of solidarity rather out of social competition. So when my girls came to me, and my leadership elective, and my 7th graders, and really everybody, when they came to me in the first semester and they said, you know, so-and-so said this to me, or somebody came up to me and was like, why don't, you know, what are you wearing today? Or why are you so stupid? Or no, you can't sit with us at lunch. This really concerned me because when I bought into this all-girl model as a teacher, I thought it was going to mirror my experience, okay? So what I ended up doing in January is I ended up having a community circle, which is something that my colleagues have discussed, where we all got together and sat around, and I posed a question to my leadership class. I said, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being never and 5 being always, how safe and supportive do you feel like the social dynamics at Girls Central Academy are? The results were very interesting. So some of the things I got was someone said, I would say a 4, a 2, a 1.5, I would say a 3, a 2, I would say a 2.5, and then one girl said, a 3, because some people can be very nice and some people can be very helpful, and then there are other people who are just not. Okay. All right, so for me, what I felt like I needed to do was examine why this was. Okay, is this a characteristic of our specific school site's social climate? Is this an unavoidable aspect of middle school and high school adolescent development? Or is this, as what I ultimately ended up examining at it as, an intersection of internalized oppression? Okay, so what I looked at with my lens, with my theory, and given my background in feminist theory, was that I looked at it from patriarchal oppression. And there are theorists who identify oppression as a four-tiered systemic problem. And one of those issues is internalization, whereby the oppressed group begins to believe that they deserve their inferior position within society. And another manifestation of internalized oppression among all groups is something called horizontal aggression, whereby members of the oppressed group turn against one another rather than turning against the system, because the system has not given them an outlet to transform their realities. Okay? And so what I looked at here, and there wasn't a great deal of literature on it, but I just went with it. I looked up here, how is mean girl behavior a manifestation of internalized patriarchy and internalized sexism? And how can bringing that lens to my student and deconstructing it with them give them a greater sense of solidarity? And will it? So that was what I went to find out. So my overarching research question was, how can I assist students in defining and developing a safe and supportive school environment? Now, this is a large question, and I understood that for the parameters of my inquiry, I needed to break it down into something a little bit more actionable. So my 3 research questions were, how might Freirean praxis provide students with a framework for action? Now, for those of you who don't know, Freirean praxis is a foundation of educational theory on which a Brazilian theorist named Paulo Freire proposed his work. So the idea is, we have a problem that is posed for us as a community. How can we together co-construct solutions for that problem, find ourselves an action to disrupt the status quo, and how can we reflect on that action in order to better our efforts in the future? So usually Freirean praxis is something that educators use in their own work, but I thought to myself, what if it were made explicit to the students? What if we gave it to the students and said, this is your practice now? What can I get from that? And then I thought about, okay, so that's a nice idea, but in what tangible ways can I assist students in developing this process? And by doing so, how might students grow as leaders in the process? So my action plan was threefold, just like praxis itself. Praxis always starts with theory, and for our class, that was 2 weeks of examining and deconstructing mean girl behavior as internalized sexism. So you might be thinking, one of the things you thought about at the beginning, when you think of Mean Girls, you think of the film. Now, the film does not represent all female experience in this country, far from it, but it was a starting point. So what did we do? We watched the movie. Okay, and so we watched the movie, and I had the girls create a Venn diagram based off of what their experience at our school was in terms of the Mean Girl problem, and what was it like in the movie, and what was the overlap. And what I found, as I'll get into later, was that they were very astutely and quickly able to sift through some of those differences. We also looked at oppression as the 4 I's of oppression being internalization, interpersonal, institutional, and ideological. And what does that mean for our gender? And what does that mean for our gender? And then we got into the action part, which was 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the group. They planned, organized, and executed a school-wide community builder, or a school-wide community facilitator. Okay. And this was by far the most difficult part of the process, because in my class I have 12 6th graders. Now, they are adorable, but they don't really know how to do anything yet. So, bless their hearts, they had all this enthusiasm, but not a lot of organizational leadership skills, right? So they're like, we're gonna do this, and I'm like, how? And they're like, we don't know, right? So that was really interesting in trying as a teacher to help facilitate without taking over, helping them facilitate their own action plan. The 6th graders were in 2 groups. One of them created a human knot activity with all the 6th graders on the field in the morning time. And the other 6th grade group did a big sister, little sister function. The 7th graders, who probably have the most mean girl issues of all, the 7th graders did a letter of kindness activity. And then in their homeroom, they got together and they did a swapped community circle advisory where they discussed how it made them feel and built community with people from outside of their advisories. The 9th graders did a high school only community building pep rally because they feel like they always get the shaft, so they wanted something just for them, and I was like, you know, that's all right, you're nice, it's okay. And then the 10th graders actually took the information from here, examining mean girl behavior as internalized sexism, and they created their own presentations, which they went to all the 10th grade advisories and gave the presentations, and in the end, they brought all the 10th graders together for one grade level community circle where they discussed how it's manifested in their lives. It's really powerful. And then finally, praxis is not complete without reflection. So they spent 1 to 2 weeks discussing in their groups as well as individuals, evaluating the process in order to enhance their growth as leaders and as individuals. So my findings, they're, you know, like anybody who's gone through this process, there's so many things you could pull from it. But what I found was that the process gave me insight into how they saw the school, which was great for me as an educator, so that I could go further and adjust and try to tweak and try to access them where they are. They also were able to easily make connections between the theory and their own lives. Students as young as 6th grade mentioned that they had been harassed over beauty standards. They had felt insecure about not being thin enough. I had a 10th grader say that in her family, her mother and her aunt always tell her, ask her why she's wasting her time with all of this science and technology when she's just going to end up getting pregnant and having a baby. I had another 10th grader who said she started shaving her legs in the 6th grade because her girlfriends teased her about being too hairy, and they called her Harry Potter, H-A-I-R-Y. So a lot of it was really unsettling, but also really powerful that these very young girls were able to be vulnerable enough and to speak their truth in such articulate ways. Another thing the students learned, especially those 6th graders, was that leaders must be patient, thorough, and plan for a variety of outcomes. So one of the things that leaders learn, or students learn, or that we as humans learn, is we learn by our mistakes. And so I think it was really powerful for them, and that's what they explicitly told me, when they were able to make those mistakes and then learn from it and move forward. Students also were able to cultivate awareness of their strengths and weaknesses. Like students were able to rate themselves on 1 to 5 on how well they were able to step up and step back, to assert themselves appropriately without being too dominant or too permissive. They rated themselves on whether or not they were able to disagree with tact, which is a particular struggle for middle school students. And what I thought was interesting about this finding is that the students were able to have very astute observations of their own strengths and weaknesses, but not necessarily able to act on that yet. And that just kind of furthered my understanding of like social emotional growth as a process. You know, it's not just a unit in a leadership class. So we as adults, we have to learn, okay, so this is what I stand for, this is how I want to behave, and then we also have to learn how to actually manifest that in our lives. And so the students were learning that alongside with me. And then finally, students' reflections demonstrated that they had a clear sense of purpose. So one of the things that the school-wide community did after their community builders was complain, okay? And my students called them the haters, and then we have a lot of haters at my school. And so we sat around in a community circle, and I said, you know, how do you feel about how it went, and da-da-da-da, and a lot of the students brought up, well, there's just so many haters, people complaining, like, they wanted Jolly Ranchers too. The 6th graders were mad because they didn't all get Jolly Ranchers after their activities. And so I kind of had a moment with them where I said, okay, so why do we do this? Like, if there's so many haters, if there's not enough Jolly Ranchers for everybody, why do we do this? And the students quickly and easily were like, well, I think it's really fun. And you know what? I think it's really powerful when my friends and people I go to school with, I see them out on the field, I see them in the activity, I see them laughing, I see them hanging out with their friends. And one student said, I know they had fun. They won't admit it, but I saw it. So that's good enough for me. Okay, and so what's next? What are these broader implications for social justice and for my work as a social justice educator? My inquiry stance was, I'm a teacher of literacy, I'm an English language arts teacher, but words are not the only thing we read as humans. So my objective as a teacher and an educator is to constantly seek to read my students, to read their body language, to read the things they don't say as well as the things they do. I also recognize that my project was very not intersectional in the fact that we only looked at our gender as a marker for our experiences. Now, I believe that in order for us to have meaningful dialogue about our differences, at first we need to create solidarity about our sameness. And so if we can create that solidarity around our gender, since it's the one marker we all share, then we can have more powerful dialogue about race or class or religion or sexuality in the future, and that's something I want to move towards. And that's something the 10th graders who are working with me are actually in the process of doing right now. And then the ironic thing was that in the students telling me why do they do this, why do they enjoy it, I had to examine my own sense of purpose, which was that I love to talk about leadership. I love to examine styles of leadership. I love to engage students in social activism and to do these types of things, to do community builders, but I don't love planning school events. In fact, I find it really stressful. Like school dances, I don't want to be part of that. And my principal is very intent on our leadership class being exclusively about planning school events, dances, trips, bake sales, that type of thing. And that's not really my jam. So I really had to be real with myself and say, what is my purpose here? Like, where is my joy? And it's not in what my administration wants me to do moving forward. So I'm going to take a step back, and I'm going to take all these things that I learned, and I'm going to try to implement them in my English language arts classes so that all of my students can benefit from it, not just my elective. And I want to end on this note from Jimena, one of my 10th graders. She said, when I asked her about her personal sense of purpose, she said, I am very passionate about school and leadership activities because it feels like it's my chance to have people listen to me. And I love that. Snap that. So that's it. That's all I got for my presentation. Thank you so much for staying the whole time.